Remember, we've taken this approach that all cultures are seeking to answer common questions that everybody asks. People in every culture ask, and every culture comes up with its own answers. And one of those questions is, what kind of creatures go bump in the night? And you say, what kind of a question is that? Well, let me share with you an old Celtic prayer that I learned from my grandmother when I was an itty-bitty boy. From ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties and things that go bump in the night, good Lord, deliver us. Have any of you ever heard that little prayer? A few of you. You can tell who the Scots are in this class. But this was a very real prayer. And so many prayers that have been passed down address some of the major issues associated with life issues. This last topic that we're going to be talking about this semester is the anthropological study of religion. One of the fascinating discoveries of anthropologists as they've been looking at cultures is that every culture has some kind of response, some kind of belief in forces that are different than the forces of nature. Call them supernatural if you want, call them whatever you want, but every culture has a concept of the supernatural. And one very, very well-known anthropologist of a previous generation, he was a Australian anthropologist. His area of specialization was Papua New Guinea, Melanesian cultures. And he said that the whole purpose of religion is to identify the supernatural forces that everybody recognizes is out there but don't understand. So they try to recognize them, categorize them, and then figure out how we can be in an appropriate relationship with them so that they do not do us harm, possibly might even be able to do us good. And indeed, anthropologists have discovered that every culture has some form of approach, cosmology, if you would, to help to explain the supernatural powers that they all suspect in the universe. So we are looking once again at our little circle. We're now down to religious systems way over there on the left. It is the last little chunk of what we're looking at in anthropology and the traditional approach to anthropology. So for our purposes today, we want to look at what is the study of religion from an anthropological perspective, and then we'll look at the components of it: cosmology, ritual, beliefs, how culture affects belief, and then we'll take a very quick look at the end to the whole issue of Christian missions and culture. Because one of the great points of tension has always been between missionaries and anthropologists who both have a very strong interest in culture. Missionaries, of course, for the purpose of evangelization, anthropologists for the purpose of academic inquiry and intellectual advancement. So that's basically what we're going to talk about today and next session. So let us begin by looking at the fundamental difference between theology and anthropology. Now, we have a school of theology, Talbot School of Theology. Meet just on the other side of the campus, I guess over this direction here. Theology basically is the study of God. Theo is God, ology is the study of, so theology is the study of God. That's fairly simple. Anthropology, on the other hand, is the study of man. Anthro being man, ology being study of, so anthropology is the study of man. Now, if you really want to get confused, there is the theological study of anthropology and there's the anthropological study of anthropology. What are we talking about? Well, the theological anthropology is really a biblical study of man. And the theological study restricts itself to looking at what the Bible tells us about human nature. Who is man? What is man's nature? What does the Bible teach us about man and about man's nature? So the theological study of mankind looks at man was created in the image of God. What does that mean? Man fell into sin, and now we have an inherited sin. What is the soul? I was just at a invigorating discussion yesterday with a theologian, a psychologist, and a philosopher, and they were raising the question, where does the soul reside? Is the soul different than the brain? And is the brain different than the mind? And oh, did that get us into a lot of stuff. And the philosopher said the mind is nothing more than an intelligent piece of meat that stores electrons and they cause the fire. That knowledge is really stored in the soul. Well, what's the soul? Well, that one's, so we got into all. Now that's what theologians do. See, they talk about the biblical nature of human beings. That is not what anthropology studies. See, now anthropology wants to know about people, but they're really not concerned whether man is body, soul, and spirit, whether they're created in the nature of God or in his image. That's over to the theologians to study. Anthropologists want to look at mankind in comparison to animals and in comparison to themselves. And so, the anthropological study of religion, which is what we're going to be looking at now, because this is what anthropologists do. It is the study of what people believe and what they do. Can we understand human beings more by examining their beliefs, by examining their behaviors? We're going to be strictly sticking to empirical, observable data. We're not going to tread on the theologian's territory. That's up for you guys to work out. Now, this raises some very interesting cross-fertilization. For instance, Kevin Piddle, who is on our faculty here, who's an anthropologist, and he just came back from the American Anthropological Association meetings. And he is a member of the Anthropological Society for the Study of Consciousness. And this really gets into some fascinating areas of discussion. And it's pushing the boundaries between theological anthropology and social anthropology. Well, these boundary pushing discussions are where we as Christians should be. And Dr. Piddle is at the forefront of a lot of that thinking. And I think I can state here that they've asked him to become an officer in the association, which is a very high commendation for him, because they do want to hear the kinds of things that we have to say. But when it comes to anthropology, one of the things that anthropologists have to set some boundaries around their study of religion. First of all, it is not the job of anthropology to determine what is right and wrong. All right? Moral judgment is not part of anthropological inquiry. I was talking with a theologian not too long ago, and I said, what you are studying in theology has critical importance for people, because if you get it wrong as to how people can be saved and can be in proper relationship to God, if you make an error, people go to hell. I said, in my field, if I come to a wrong conclusion about the nature of people's inquiry, about their motivation, if I come up with the wrong taxonomy, or I come up with the wrong research method, and 15 years from now I say, oh shoot, I really screwed up here. Oh well, we had a lot of fun anyway. Nobody goes to hell because I used the wrong methodology to study the religious beliefs of the Dani. But if we get it wrong about the plan of salvation, people suffer for eternity. I said, I've got a fun field. You've got an ominous responsibility to bear. And he collapsed and said, oh, you're so right, Hayward. Well, okay. Okay, so we're not going to determine whether what the Dani believe is right or wrong, although as a missionary, I did have some opinions, but that was not part of my anthropological inquiry. Anthropologists do not try to prove the existence of God. That's a job for the theologians. That's a job for the philosophers. That's a job for the people who are in apologetics. They're going to analyze the proofs for God. That's not part of anthropological inquiry. We don't talk about that at American Anthropological Association meetings. So, what does anthropology do? Well, it asks some important research questions. In the same way that biologists ask about the nature of life, anthropologists ask about the nature of people in society. So we ask these questions: what do people believe? Now, right now, I am reading a master's thesis for one of our graduate anthropology students. She just came back from northern India, where she did some study with the people in the Himalayan region called Sikkim. All right, so she was up there, and she was looking at people's belief in a dragon spirit. And one of the interesting things about that part of the world is the dragon is actually an emblem that is on their national flag, particularly Bhutan. The dragon is very important. People believe in the dragon. She said, I want to look into this dragon spirit to find out what people believe. I said, that's a great anthropological inquiry. Go and do interviews, do whatever you need to do. Find out what people believe about the dragon. So she went, she studied their myths. She talked to their shaman. She talked to the Buddhist monks. She found out everything she could regarding what people believe about the dragon spirit that they believe live in the Himalayan mountains. And then, a second question: how do people express these beliefs? What impact does it have on their behavior? Do they offer it sacrifices? Do they pray to it? Do they organize rituals around it? What do they do in response to these beliefs? Every set of beliefs results in some kind of behavior. What are those behavioral responses? Thirdly, can we discover the origins or at least the effects of these beliefs? Now, the early anthropologists really screwed up in this area because they started looking at the origins of religion, and they made an awful lot of hypothetical conclusions that could not be proved. And they tried to predict or conjecture that the origins of religion were ignorance. It was fear. It was whatever else. We've had to back off from the study of the origins of religion. There was one author back in the 1960s who did a massive study of over 300 cultures, and he came up to the conclusion that religion was the result of ignorance, and he wrote a little book called The Birth of the Gods. And I read that book when I was a graduate student, and it made me so furious. I told my professor, I said, listen, I simply cannot allow this bad piece of research to stand. I said, I've got to respond to this. It's offensive. It's bad anthropology. And my anthropology professor said, Hayward, we all know it was a piece of flawed research. Don't waste your time on it. Nobody buys into that anymore. We cannot go back and make conjectures regarding the origins of beliefs. What we have to do is spend time on whatever those origins were, what is its result today? I said, okay, I'll back off. I'm still not happy, but I'll back off. Let's focus on what are the effects of our beliefs. A prime example is, if we believe that cows are sacred, as they do in India, then what are the effects of that belief? Well, we don't kill cows. Therefore, people are going to be protein hungry. How do they get different kinds of protein? What are the effects of having all these stray cows running around? What happens if they won't kill mice? And you have mice eating grain by the bushelful, destroying crops. Wow. How is this impacting the ecology, the diet, the nutrition, and the well-being and health of the people? These are the kinds of things we can study. Can we go back to the origins of the vegetarian regulations of Hindu culture? Probably not, but we can look at its impact on us today. So we can look at the personal impact, we can look at the social impact, we can look at the ecological impact of religious beliefs. Fourthly, do certain kinds of beliefs go along with certain kinds of cultural patterns? And this is going to be a very interesting area of study, because you will discover that religious systems, belief systems, do correlate with social organization systems. And this becomes very important as we seek to understand the growth of religious institutions. We'll be talking about that these couple of days. I might add that as Christians, as Christian anthropologists, we are quite happy to sign on to this research agenda. We're quite happy to look at what people believe. We're quite happy to look at how they express their beliefs. We're quite happy to look at the effects of these beliefs. We're quite happy to look at the cultural correlates of beliefs. As a matter of fact, my whole dissertation did exactly this. I looked at what the Dani people believed. I looked at how they expressed those beliefs in their rituals. I looked at the effects of those beliefs on their lives. And I looked at how there were certain cultural correlates. Let me just give an example of a cultural correlate. One of the things I discovered was in the Baalim Valley, in the Grand Valley of the Baalim, the people there had hardly any fear of women's witchcraft. But in the valley where I lived, the men were terrified of women's black magic. So here you've got two cultures that for all outside practical purposes are practically identical. Now, there were a lot of significant differences when you began looking at the details, but they're all called Dani. Western Dani versus Grand Valley Dani, but they're all called Dani. And yet, they're not afraid of women's black magic. They are afraid of black magic. Why? What is the difference? Well, an anthropological inquiry would quickly demonstrate the difference. Women in the Grand Valley were under greater control by powerful men. It was a more organized society in respect to granting power to men and marginalizing the role of women. So men were not as fearful of women in the Grand Valley. But in the Western Dani, women had a great deal more autonomy. Women had a great deal more ability to threaten the men in their lives. If they didn't like a man, they could run off with another man and live in a different valley. You couldn't do that in the Grand Valley. There was no place to run to. So women had greater autonomy, and because of men's fear of women's autonomy, they implied that they had greater power then in exercising black magic. You know what? This is a pattern we've seen everywhere in the world. Where men fear the power of women, they attribute to women greater access to supernatural black magic. So we had witchcraft trials. We had witchcraft accusations. And I've been to these. I've been to witchcraft trials. We've done everything we could to save the lives of women being accused of being witches. There's a definite cultural correlation between men's desire to control women and men's fear of women. We won't go into all of that right now. Well, take Kevin Pittle's class, Magic, Witchcraft, and Sorcery, all right? He'll talk a lot more about that in that class, because this idea that women have power with magic is part of a larger discussion. But as Christians, one of the additional questions that we want to ask is, how does human sin impact religion? See, that's not something that secular anthropologists are going to ask. We want to know, how does sin impact people's beliefs? And we want to ask still a third question, or still another question. How does Satan impact religion? Because as evangelicals, we believe in the reality of a fallen angel by the name of Satan. Does he have an impact upon religious beliefs? So those are our basic research questions as Christians, as anthropologists. Let's take a look at how that works out. Let's go back to that first question. What do people believe? Now, one of our very first lectures, we talked about the outside of that circle, the worldview. Let's go back and look at worldview assumptions that are the foundation for religious inquiry. Worldview assumptions are going to be very, very fundamental. The first worldview assumption that we're going to come up with is that the world consists of entirely natural phenomenon. Or we're going to say that there is an ability for supernatural interventions. That there is a reality to the supernatural world. You either take the one view The world only consists of that which we can prove with the scientific methodology, versus those that can say, oh no, there is the prospect of something that exists outside of the realm of human nature or of nature, period. If you embrace a worldview assumption that is naturalistic, you will come up with one of two worldviews: scientism or atheism. Scientism or atheism. Atheism is a total denial of the existence of God or the supernatural. There is no God, there is no devil, there are no angels, there are no miracles. All there are unexplained phenomenon from nature, which one day we will discover the answers to. By the way, there are very few true atheists in the world. All right? It is a very difficult position to sustain. There are a lot of folk who question the existence of God, but there are very few who actually deny him with intellectual credibility. More common is what we call scientism. Scientism says, I will not believe in anything unless I can study it and verify it with scientific method. Now that raises a really interesting kind of a thing, because you have at least one very popular scientist who said the cosmos is all there ever was, all that is, and all that ever will be. And he phrased it exactly like that so that he could say, you know, he could use the same phraseology as those who say that God is, was, and always will be. No, science. Science is all there ever is, was, and will be. Okay, that becomes more than just a scientific methodology. That becomes a belief system that rules out anything that we cannot prove. Now, that is one particular worldview. A lot of folk who are agnostic, all right? Atheists deny God. Agnostics just say, yeah, if he exists, prove him to me, and I will be happy to give him my belief. In the meantime, don't bother me with the details. So you got agnostics, you got atheists. We move over to the other side. To those who suspect that there's something out there, but have to figure out what it is. So when it comes to supernaturalistic perceptions, there are two kinds of people. Again, I'm trying to make this as straightforward and as simple as possible, perhaps oversimplified, but if there is a belief in the existence of supernatural beings, one view is those supernatural beings, over there on the personal side, supernatural beings are actually creatures that can think or have minds or have wills. They're actual entities. But there are those who say, no, no, no. The supernatural powers that exist are just powers. They don't have minds. They are influences. Any Star Wars fans here, you know, let the Force be with you. Okay? The Force is an impersonal supernatural power. Can we call upon impersonal supernatural powers? If you want to call on impersonal supernatural powers, you do not pray to them, because prayer has to be given to a being. Oh God, help us, please. I'll be good. I'll follow you. I'll make an offering. I'll do whatever you ask. Just help me. You don't do that with a supernatural power. With a supernatural power, you just do the right ritual, and it will unlock the key to accessing that supernatural power. So, you ever read the Arabian Nights, you know, Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, you know, abracadabra, you know, say the right words, the rock opens up and here's all of this treasure inside. Now that's a supernatural power. All it requires is the right formula. Maybe you watched The Sorcerer's Apprentice with, was it Mickey Mouse? No. Nobody going to admit that you've seen Mickey Mouse doing The Sorcerer's Apprentice, but there's the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and you know he's got to scrub out the upper room up there, and he's tired of carrying the buckets up, so he reads the sorcerer's little book, and as he reads the book, he causes the broom to come alive, and the broom starts carrying water, and then he's getting too much water and things are going into trouble, and he tries to turn it off, but he can't find the right page to turn it off, and the sorcerer comes back and gets all angry at him. Oh, come on, you've seen that movie. I know you have. All right. Well, that's because it's not an appeal to a supernatural being. It's an appeal to supernatural power. And wizards in the Middle Ages were trying to find the sources of this supernatural power. And one of the great attempts by these early scientists, I'll call them that, functioning as wizards, was to unlock the key to supernatural powers through the saying of proper incantations, engaging in the proper rituals, securing this power that was not available to normal people. They had hoped to turn copper into gold through alchemy. They hoped to be able to manipulate the power of the planets through astrology. They tried a number of things to try to access this impersonal power. That's entirely different than a belief in personal entities. If you believe in personal entities, then you're going to fall into either deist. Okay, now a deist is a person that believes that God created the universe and then left. Said, okay, it's up to you to figure things out now. So off God went, and we're responsible for whatever mess we make of life. Okay. You could have theists. Theists are those who believe that God created the universe, but he's still sticking around and he's still got his hand in things. He still works with people. He still engages in miracles. He still guides people, etc., etc. In theism, God is more active in the universe. In deism, he has absented himself. But there are those who believe not just in powerful high gods. There are people who believe in a whole host of spirit beings. And these spirit beings are variously described. They could be nature spirits. They could be ancestral spirits. They could be family spirits. They could be spirits of places. When I was studying Donnie culture, I discovered that they had spirits of the mountains, they had spirits in the water, they had spirits in caves, they had tribal spirits, family spirits, they had sickness spirits, they had good spirits. Oh, they had category upon category upon category. All of these spirits had specific areas of influence and interest. If you're going to embrace the impersonal concept, you know, let the force be with you. Is that what they said? Was it this? I haven't watched that Star Wars in years. Anyway, you know, let the force be with you. Well, whatever that was, it was you know, very, very popular. But you could have this belief in a supernatural force in which in which all of life loses its identity and it all becomes one with the universal life force, which would be Hinduism. In some respects, it's also got its similarities in Buddhism, where we try to deny our individual existence and we become one with the universal life force of the universe, and we no longer experience the ups and downs of life. This all in all, it is more than pantheism. It is a belief in the unity of all existence. So these are the options available to us as we look at these basic worldview assumptions. Well, these worldview assumptions are going to lead us then into the type of religion that we develop. Once we develop these worldview assumptions into religious beliefs, then we're going to start expressing how to live according to those beliefs. So we're going to be looking at the function of rituals. Rituals are the way we relate to supernatural powers. Rituals establish our relationships with our God, gods, or spirits. If you believe in ancestral spirits, you have a little shrine. You put it in a corner in your house. And you have pictures or whatever else, other objects to represent the ancestors in that ancestral shrine. And every day you leave a small offering before that shrine in honor of the ancestors. This maintains an ongoing relationship with the ancestors, with the ancestral spirits, and with the living today. I was down in Santa Ana several months ago. I was there on an early Saturday morning. I wanted a cup of coffee desperately. I found a little donut shop. I went into the donut shop, and you don't want to just buy a cup of coffee from a donut shop. You've got to have a donut too, you know. So I got me a donut and I got me a cup of coffee, and I looked up, and up there on a little shelf above the door between the room and the cooking area was a little idol. I really don't like to call it an idol, but it was a little shrine. And I looked up and I saw that and I said, oh my goodness, that is a Thai shrine. A shrine to Buddha that has all of the characteristics of culture in Thailand. So I turned to the woman and I said, are you people from Thailand? And she said, no. I said, where are you from? She said, Cambodia, right next door. And she said, why do you ask? I said, because your little shrine up there is a Thai shrine. She says, oh yes. She said, we fled from Cambodia to Thailand and then Thailand to the United States, and so we brought the shrine from Thailand. Every morning, they put a little offering up there to the ancestors, worshiping it in a form that is culturally very, very specific. They want to maintain this relationship with their ancestors. These rituals will also bind a community together. Rituals bind us together. They help us to establish a sense of who we are. Now, I once, Early in my career, taught a class for University of California, Santa Barbara. I taught a class on new religious movements, and one of the older students in the class asked me if my wife and I would like to come to his place for a dinner. He was going to have a number of families. So I said, yeah, we'd be willing to do that. I went home and I told my wife, I said, I just did something I don't like to do. I said, I just accepted a social invitation without checking with you first. But I said, I really needed to make a decision right away. And we didn't have a cell phone in those days. So I said yes for you. And I know my wife does not like me to commit her to social engagements without checking. She said, what kind of a deal is it? I said, I don't have the foggiest clue. He's invited us to his house. There are going to be some other people there. I know exactly nothing about him. Oh, she said, what can happen? So we went. Nice little place down in Summerlin, just below Santa Barbara. We went up to the house up into the mountains there and came in, and sure enough, there were about 12 people there. There was a neighbor who lived right next door. And there was the head of the Salvation Army in Santa Barbara. He was there. And then there were a bunch of family members, and then the man and his wife. So we showed up not knowing what we were into. I mean, they could have been, a witch's coven for all we knew, but we showed up. And the first thing they did was, Dr. Hayward, so glad to see you and your wife. Yeah. Here's a glass of wine. Well, I wasn't under contract to Biola in those days, so it was okay. Oh, thank you, So we're standing there. Well, they're not Christians. At least I didn't think they were. At least not our kind of Christian. So we got the wine and we're getting acquainted with people. And I still don't know what we're into. And then it comes time to sit down for the meal. So we sit down to the meal. And they light a couple of candles. Okay, here we come, So then I waited. And then Father starts saying a little chant. And as soon as he started his little chant, I said, I know where we're at now. Because I recognized that it's Friday evening. It's the start of Sabbath. And he is giving the Sabbath prayer. Okay, I could relax. We were not in some kind of Satan orgy where we were going to end up being sacrificed on a bloody altar in the back room, when we got all done with the little prayer, he turned at me and winked because he knew he was playing me. He said, now do you know where you're at? And I said, of course I know where I'm at. And it's a privilege to be here. He knew he was stringing me along. But in any case, why was this important? Because on this particular Friday night, he had all of his children come, one who worked down in Hollywood, one who worked in Santa Barbara. It was a chance for the whole family to come together and to celebrate the start of the Sabbath. And he said, as is our custom, every Sabbath meal, we ask ourselves, what can we be thankful to? So we all had to go around the room saying what we were thankful to for that week. And I realized here was a father who was holding his family together and their Jewish tradition by maintaining Sabbath worship and a family tradition of thanking God for the blessings of the previous week. And the one son, who was a very secular Jew, said, what can I be thankful for? What can I be thankful? I don't even know what to be thankful for. This has been a horrible week. He said, I did find a new place where I could eat kosher sandwiches. Yeah, okay, I'm thankful for a new kosher restaurant near where I live. It wasn't very good, but you know what? It was still preserving family harmony, binding the community together. Rituals also express the faith of the community. We want to be able to express what we believe through what we do. And as we approach the Christmas season, we struggle as Christians to keep the focus on Jesus Christ. We struggle to make sure that Christmas is an expression of our faith in the coming of Jesus Christ to be the Savior of the world. We don't want it simply to be the favorite shopping season of all of the stores. We want it to be more than just the midwinter festival. We want it to be more than Xmas. We want it to be a ritual, a ceremony, a celebration in which the spirit of the season is the Christ of the season. So rituals become a way of expressing our faith. And to tell you the truth, attending church on Sunday needs to be a way in which, first of all, we bind our families together and our communities together. It also needs to be a way in which we express our faith in Christ. Do not take lightly the fact that Sunday is a day of worship and you need to be in a community of believers. It's also a way of channeling the power of faith. Channeling the power of faith. We believe that prayer changes the world, changes lives. We believe that fasting can have powerful spiritual effect in our lives. As a matter of fact, in this discussion I was talking to you about in the question about what is the human soul, the question that we raised was, does faith actually change the structure of the brain? And you know what? There are some studies that indicate that people of faith have different brain functions than people who do not have faith. Your faith is affecting the way your brain functions. It may even affect the way your brain has grown. Oh, has that got all kinds of powerful implications? Faith has power, and we want to channel that power according to our faith. So, we've talked about rituals. One of the things that anthropologists do is look at rituals all around the globe, rituals in every culture. This is a favorite topic of anthropological inquiry. So they look at the way people chant, the way people pray. They look at their meditation strategies. They look at yoga. I have a book in my library done by an anthropologist who made a lifetime of studying meditation postures from around the globe, and has discovered that if you get in certain postures and you stay there for a certain amount of time, you can actually produce physiological changes in the body that will result in, I'm not sure what I want to call it, that will result in certain mental changes in the mind that could be interpreted as being spiritual experiences. So you can actually induce a trance state that will open you up to spiritual realities through certain kinds of positions, which is one of the reasons why so many Christians struggle with yoga. Because yoga is a native or an Indian, South Asian, Indian practice for entering into meditation in order to enter into a receptive state for the Hindu gods and goddesses. Can it be Christianized? Oh boy. Take Kevin Pittle's class and write that as a paper. All right, dancing. Dancing is also a religious ritual. And there's a number of very famous videos on religious dancing. There's dancing in Bali, done by Margaret Mead, and she shows how the Balinese will engage in certain kind of dances. There is dancing in Turkey that will lead to certain kinds of trances. There's dance rituals all over the world. Native American dances are some of the most famous. There is singing. There is the process of going through ordeals, where you try to suffer either through fasting or through inflicting the body with pain in order to engage in religious rituals. And there are what we would call symbolic enactments. What's a symbolic enactment? I don't know what your religious tradition is, but if you believe in baptism by immersion, and if you are a Baptist, then baptism is a symbolic enactment. The believer goes into the baptismal waters, and in the standard baptismal ceremony, the pastor then asks the person, do you believe in Jesus Christ, and have you received him into your heart as your personal Savior? The person who's to be baptized says, I have and I do. Then the pastor turns and says to everybody, on the basis of this person's confession of faith, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, I baptize you under the water and back up. Why does it have to be in the water, under, back up? Because this represents identification with Christ, identification with his death, his burial, and his resurrection. In the same way that Christ died, was buried, and was resurrected, you died to your old self, you are buried to the old self, you are raised up in newness in Christ. See, it's a ritual reenactment of your identification with Christ, and now your identification with the body of believers who have also made that same profession of faith. We do these kinds of things. We have symbolic enactments. Well, let's keep moving on as we try to get our way through all of these anthropological approaches to the study of people's beliefs. What about looking at the origins or effects of belief? I've already indicated that it is impossible to separate out and to identify the origins of religion. Sigmund Freud was a brilliant man. And he made some insights into the nature of human sexuality, human behaviors that were phenomenal. He wasn't always right. But you know what? We today stand on his shoulders in respect to what we now know about being a human being. But one of the biggest mistakes that Sigmund Freud ever made was trying to figure out how the Oedipus complex came about and how incest regulations originated. So he makes a broad claim. He states the Oedipus complex and fear of incest began with the early primal horde of human beings who all lived like animals together. And in those days, Dad was the alpha male. And Dad claimed the right to sexual access to all of the females in the horde. And so Dad would beat his sons and drive them away from being able to have sexual access to their sisters or any other females in the horde. Dad got to impregnate all the females. And the sons got kind of fed up with Dad being stingy this way. So all of the sons ganged up on Dad and they killed him. And once they killed Dad, they said, ha, now we can have all the women to ourselves. But then they said, oh, yuck. It's not right that we should have sex with our own mother. Now they're feeling guilt, horrible guilt at having killed dad. So then they make a new rule. Okay, we've got to have certain regulations. Sons can't have sex with their mothers. Sisters, okay, but not mothers. So this is Sigmund Freud's analysis of the Oedipus complex and the origin of marriage regulations. What evidence does he give for this? Absolutely none. There's no evidence of people, humans, ever living as a horde. It's just a presupposition. And it's a bad one. But he builds a whole scientific theory around his supposition. We can't go back to those days. Freud, you blew it. You built a scientific theory on an unproven set of origins. Get off of it. So, what we did was we started looking more in depth at the effects of religion upon cultures and on people. And one of the things that we discovered when we started focusing on this aspect of belief is religion does serve certain personal functions. It does serve the individuals within the society. To begin with, it helps to resolve questions of the unknown. There are lots of things we don't know. There are lots of things we can't figure out. Sometimes religion gives us answers to these unknown elements. What causes certain things to happen? We don't know. Must be one of the supernatural forces that live in the universe. This was typical everywhere in the world. Unanswered questions were given religious cause and effect. Now, as we become more knowledgeable, we discovered that sometimes there were scientific bases. Why did so many people die of cholera? Well, this is a major problem. Still is, even in a place like India. People are dying of cholera every day. What causes cholera? The cholera god. There's a cholera god that's mad at us. We have to sacrifice an oxen to the cholera goddess. Make her stop making people sick. Or, well, we just need to start drinking better water. We need to start taking better health standards, et cetera, et cetera. There's this constant tension between science and faith. You would think then that if this is the total answer, that more knowledge would make God go away. And indeed, for a couple hundred years, scientifically minded scholars were convinced that the more education we got, the less people would believe in God. Now, America is one of the highest educated populations in the world. Has Christianity or even religion died in America? Actually not. It's changed considerably. We no longer blame disease and epidemics on God, unless, of course, you're a modern-day fundamentalist who believes that AIDS is a curse from God for human sin, in which case, we don't have to worry about finding the epidemiology and all of that regarding AIDS. They just blame God or human sin. I'm not sure I can buy that, but religion does resolve the unknown. And do you want to know something? Even when we know everything, there are still plenty of room for faith. Last summer, my son died. It was unexpected. It was tragic. Broke our hearts. Why? I can give you all the biological reasons. You know, organ failure, this, that. But you know what? I can live at peace with the death of my son, because even though I can't answer all the why questions, I'm convinced that it was part of God's plan for him, and I can rest in that. See, I can rest in the unanswered questions of life by knowing that God holds me in the palm of his hand. And you know what? That allows you to face incredible uncertainty and pain and future troubles, because you know that your faith is bringing purpose and meaning behind what happens. So religion does bring faith and peace and hope when everything seems to be black. It comforts us. It comforts us. When my son became very, very ill, we were on the mission field. We were a long way from medical help. There was nothing that I could do except hold him in my arms and rock all evening, all night with him until the morning when an airplane could come in and pick us up and get him to the nearest hospital. You know what? It was a horrible night, but it was a night in which I could find comfort in my faith. These are the kinds of things that religion has done, continues to do, and will continue to do. That's why the 23rd Psalm is so popular. Yea, though I walk through the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. We can find comfort in our faith. And religion gives meaning and purpose to our lives. All right? The worst thing that you're going to face in the course of your lifetime is to believe that you have lived in vain. Because a life of emptiness is not worth living. Every one of us must find a meaningful or find meaning in our lives. There was a very famous psychologist who went through the Nazi war camps. He was a Jewish psychologist in the 1940s. And he discovered something very interesting. He discovered that the people who survived the death camps were people who had found something to live for. And as long as they had something to live for, as long as they had something that could give life to, or meaning to their life, purpose to their lives, they could endure incredible suffering. Unfortunately, much of his study does not identify the kinds of things that can triumph over incredible suffering. But that's something that future generations could work on. But we do need meaning and purpose in life. Let's move beyond personal functions. Let's move to how religion impacts the society as a whole. Religion will often serve to validate our culture. We'd like to think that what we do is God-honoring. and that through our culture, we will be able to spread a way of life that honors God. So we want Christian values infused within our laws and in our lifestyle. And then we try to validate our culture. We do this because it's the Christian thing to do. Every culture does this. Islamic culture does it. Jewish culture does it. Virtually every culture uses their religion to validate their way of life. It is a way to bring greater authenticity to what we do. It will also be used to control human behavior. I don't know about you, but I know when I was growing up and in high school, back in those days, the church that I was a member of was very, very conservative. And our church did not approve of going to movies. Movies were the devil's dance hall. And you know what they used to tell me in Sunday school? You know, Jesus is going to come back real soon. Would you want to be in a movie when Jesus returns? Oh, can you imagine the shame of being raptured out of a theater, watching Marilyn Monroe cavort on the screen? Or even worse, would you want to be at a dance hall in the arms of some girl that you just barely knew, and you got raptured and left her all alone? Oh, you'd be mortified. Do you ever get disciplined that way? Don't do it because God's watching you. Don't do it because God doesn't approve. Every religion uses its belief to control human behavior. If you do this, God will punish you. Or you did this, that's why you are now sick. So religion does control behaviors. It also has an impact on ecology, ecological functions. So, how does religion impact ecology? Well, it will promote a balance with nature, or sometimes dominance over nature. So many religions will become very, very sensitive to ecological issues. One of the first things that happened when the ecology movement burst forth in the American scene was it attacked Christianity for taking the approach that we were required to subdue culture and thereby destroy culture. Christianity was seen, or not culture, nature. Christianity was anti-ecology, anti-nature, and therefore Christianity was the enemy of a healthy planet. Well, we had just a whole rush of books seeking to correct that impression, and I hope has made us much more sensitive to ecological matters. As a matter of fact, we even have a class around here now offered by the science department on Christianity and healthy ecology. Now, these are the kinds of things that anthropologists study. There's just one problem with all of them. None of them address the question of man's deep spiritual longing. And this is something that anthropologists have not been able to address. They are not able to find an answer to the question of that spiritual hunger that all human beings show. I have no way of describing this apart from referring to René Pascal, the early scholar who said, there is in the heart of every human being a God-shaped vacuum that cannot be filled except by God himself. As long as God is not in the center of our lives, there is an emptiness that will plague us. A more recent scholar just said, every sin that people commit today is an expression of an emptiness in their lives. If you pursue behaviors that God does not approve, you are expressing an emptiness that you've not allowed God to fulfill in your lives. Oh boy, now I've gone from being a teacher to a preacher.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.